5:15, I'd like to call July 25th. Planning Commission meeting to order and for pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call has been taken. Need a motion to adopt the agenda with the memorandum.
Make a motion.
I'll second. Oh, go ahead.
I'll second.
Motion was made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Review for approval of the May 23rd, 2024 Planning Commission minute meetings as read in your packet. Okay, David.
I'll make a motion to accept that.
I'll second.
Motion been made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's carried.
We're ready for public hearing portion regarding the proposed amendment of the boundaries and project plan of the tax and amendment district number 5.
To start off with, I'll invite Harry from our consultant from Ellers to kind of talk about the project plan and what we're talking about with the amendment, proposed amendment of TID number 5, and then proposed creation of TID number 7. So, Harry, do you want us to officially open up the public hearing yet, or do you want to kind of go through some information first?
Either way.
Okay.
Yep.
Why don't we go through the information first, Chad? That
Sure.
way it might
And then Bernie can,
precipitate some questions.
yep, and then Bernie can open up the public hearing at that point in time if there's any questions. So
That works.
go ahead, Harry.
Perfect. Do you want to pull up the presentation?
Yep.
Awesome.
Second.
So tonight we're talking about amending tax increment district number 5 and creating tax increment district number 7 for this portion of the agenda. I'm just going to cover the amendment to TID number 5. So I prepared a brief slide deck just to give you an overview as to what tax increment is, and then we'll get into what we're doing with TID 5. So tax increment, at the end of the day, it's a financing tool. It's really the only tool that exists at the local level to fund economic development type activities. And so the way that it works is you define a geographical area and you essentially freeze all the value that exists there at the time that you create it or add it to a tax increment district. And all the taxes paid on that value continue to go to all the overlapping units as if that district wasn't created at all. Any new growth in value, so that could be any type of economic appreciation, any type of new development, just any increase in value gets treated differently. So the full tax rate of all the overlapping bodies still gets charged to that value, but instead of those taxes going to everybody else, they go into a special fund controlled by the city to pay for costs necessary to attract that new development and that growth in that area. So it's a pretty powerful tool because you're able to use that full tax rate on the new development to support those costs. Whereas if you didn't have a tax increment district, you're really just getting the city's portion of that new tax bill. So this allows the city to recover more money on the front end so that you can incur the costs necessary to go after these economic development projects. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. The process for creating a tax increment district, it starts with the joint review board. So the joint review board that's made up of the county, the city, the tech college, the school, they all do have a say in whether the city is able or is not able to create the tax increment district in the way that you intend to. So the idea here is that everybody benefits from economic development because once this district closes, all that value does roll onto the tax rolls of all the overlapping bodies, and there's that shared benefit at that point. So it's really this cost sharing agreement over the term of the district being open. With that, we'll dive into TID number 5. So this is an existing tax increment district within the city. It's created several years ago, and then it was subsequently amended in 2022. So just to give you an idea, the boundaries here on the left side is the boundary map. This is also included on page 8 of the project plan. So this is largely the downtown area of the city. The green area, that's the original boundaries when the district was created. And then this was amended in 2022 to go north to pick up some parcels to support First State Bank. And now it's being extended with 2 parcels to the south for an apartment development that's directly adjacent to this district that needs some financial incentive to make that project feasible. So in total, we're looking at adding just under an acre of territory to TID number 5. And this is directly to support the construction of those apartments. There's also a provision in statute that anytime you amend a tax increment district, you have to state the cost of that amendment. In this case, we're showing a pretty high cost to this amendment, just because we're truing up some of the prior costs that were incurred as compared to the original project plan. And there was a discrepancy there. Some of the infrastructure costs that got funded downtown were higher than were contemplated in that original project plan. The only cost that we're adding with this amendment is that incentive for this apartment building. So the numbers look a lot bigger, but that's just a true up to audited financials. This was created as a mixed use district, so has a 20-year life. That 20-year life has already started. Nothing is changing on that front with this amendment. There are 2 findings for a mixed use district. The first is that at least half of the total area of the district has to be developable, and you need 2 different uses. So whether that's commercial, residential, industrial, 2 of the 3. In this case, you have the commercial, you have the residential, and on an acreage basis, 63% of the total area is developable. Really, the only areas that are not are the right-of-way that's included within the district. The second test is what's known as a newly platted residential test. You can only support newly platted residential development within a mixed-use type district, and that newly platted residential can only make up 35% of the total acreage of that district. In this case, we're looking at 24% of the total acreage going for newly platted, so we're okay. Looking at the proposed development, so this is just on those 2 parcels. You're looking at some apartment buildings being constructed there. Looking at the values coming on, we did model out the other development that we're aware of within the district. So there's a Swiderski apartment building that will add a substantial amount of value when that's completed. First State Bank, that is completed at this point. We're expecting that on the January 1, 24 assessment, which will be available next week. So we'll update the schedule when it goes to council. We'll have actual values here for that 23 construction year. The apartment building, we have that modeled at $2.5 million based on some preliminary information from the assessor. And then we have some miscellaneous type development that could occur within the greater downtown area. So that's just modeled at around $1 million of additional development, whether that's economic appreciation or some rehab or new construction within the area. It's likely that there will be other projects outside of these 3 main ones. So in total, around 21 million of incremental value by the time this district closes. So this is the prior plan project costs. That original plan did contemplate a fair amount of infrastructure being funded, and then it was amended later on to add additional developer incentives. So that original plan had an incentive in it already for Swiderski, and then we amended in 2022 to add that state bank incentive, add some additional budget for admin type expenses. When we look at what's actually been spent to date, there is an estimated cost of 2.8 million. We've already spent 3.3 million when you look at audited financials. Just a mismatch there. Project plans aren't a budget. They're an idea of what could be incurred. But when you are amending, the state kind of makes you treat it as if it was a budget. So that's the exercise we're going through here, which shows you've overspent the prior project plans. And then we're adding in the new costs. So we're just truing up a lot of those previous infrastructure costs to what they will cost now. Some minor infrastructure costs could be incurred in the future. We have that estimated potentially another 800,000 of infrastructure costs into the future. But the main new expense that we're adding is an additional developer incentive estimated at 300,000 based on 50% of the tax bill on this new apartment building. That agreement's still subject to change. So nothing's final on that front. And by including the numbers in the way that we have in this project plan, it does not commit the city to doing anything. That is a totally separate process. So in total, now we're looking around 4.3 million of cost. That's adding in the borrowing cost as well. So that's something that was left out of previous project plans, the interest cost on the debt issue that you guys incurred last year. So that's where you're seeing a lot of a mismatch here between the two. So in total, when we back out and we add in all the expenses, I know these numbers are impossible to read, so I'll talk about kind of what's going on here. On the left is your total revenues coming into the district, which includes primarily those tax increment dollars, as well as your debt proceeds from the borrowing incurred last year. And then there's an advance into this district as well from the wastewater treatment plant. On the right, we're adding in all the expenses, so that's your debt service on the 23 bonds, as well as the 3 incentives that will exist within this district, and then some future capital projects to the tune of an estimated 800,000. And then at the back end, the intent is to reimburse that wastewater treatment plant transfer in at some point to the extent that district revenues are available. So we show around 300,000 of that 800,000 transfer being able to be reimbursed. Hopefully more development comes in and you're able to recover that full amount. But we are showing that this district would need all the remaining years of its life to recover its cost. So a closure out in 2042. That's everything I had on TID 5.
He doesn't need a motion. He can just open up a public hearing for TID number 5. So
Need a motion to open up the public hearing.
You can just open it, I guess. You don't need a motion.
as the chairman, you can just declare I'm opening up the public hearing for TID number
Okay.
5.
Declare opening up a public hearing for TID 5.
Just ask a couple times to make sure.
Declare opening up public hearing for TID 5. I see no people here. Just close it.
Yep.
Okay, going on to number 5. Public hearing regarding the creation of the tax increment district. Number 7, the purpose boundaries of the district is to propose a project plan for the district.
We'll allow Harry to jump into number 5 then.
So
Or
we,
sorry, TID number 7.
you're good.
Yep.
We're talking about an amendment. Now we're talking about a creation. So similar type of process, but now you're establishing an entirely new district. This district is intended to be on the north side of town. So it's these green parcels on the map on the left side of the screen right now. Largely, this district is being created to capture the incremental value that's going to be created by Aldi. And then any other development that could occur within this area. The thought here to create the district is to create a financing mechanism to pay for the necessary infrastructure to make this area developable. So instead of going out and levying your general property taxpayer to make this improvement, the thought here is to use TIF as a way to keep that off the levy, find another financing mechanism, and hopefully attract additional development to the city. So really the main reason for this district is to create that financing mechanism for infrastructure. And we phase that infrastructure between phase 1 and phase 2. We'll touch on that more in a later slide. The project plan also includes a line item for potential developer incentives should they be needed in the future. There's nothing contemplated at this point in time, but by including it in the project plan, it gives the city flexibility. Should there be a need for some type of incentive in the future, you don't have to go through this whole amendment process down the road. You can just have those conversations with whatever developer at that point and not have that extra step that you need to go through. This is also being created as a mixed-use district, so same type of district that TID 5 is, which means it has a 20-year life under statute, the same two findings. So on that 50% developable test, we're looking at 84% of the area is developable. The only area that's not is the right-of-way included in the boundaries and that planned future right-of-way for the new roadways. This still has that 35% newly platted restriction. There is potentially some multifamily residential that could occur within this area. So just to be conservative and plan for that, we've estimated around 16% of the area could go towards newly platted residential, so far under that 35% limit. Looking at the proposed development, really the main thing here is the Aldi. That's going up pretty quick, so I think it's important to talk about timing here too. This district is being created as a January 1, 2024 district, which means you're kind of going back in time and setting the base as of anything that existed on January 1 of this year. Anything after January 1 of this year, that will go into incremental value and create dollars within this tax increment district. So by creating that at this district at this point in the year, that Aldi will fully be incremental value within this district. There's a potential Ascension medical facility that could develop south of the Aldi, and then kind of a question mark as to how all the other sites will develop throughout this area. Hopefully, once infrastructure is in place, they become marketable and you see more development. But the way we've modeled the plan right now is trying to make it as conservative as possible, really show you what we consider the worst case scenario, just so that everybody goes into this eyes wide open and understands if things don't build out the way that we hope, where does the city sit? Just based on the development we know of right now. So getting to that point, the only development is at Aldi. We looked at comparable Aldis in the area to come up with a projected value from that of just north of $2 million. So $2.25 million is what we're estimating for the Aldi. We did run a separate scenario where we kind of looked at some illustrative development happening throughout the district. But it was decided that maybe this is a scenario we should go with, just looking at, we know the Aldi's there. We don't know about anything else. So let's run with this, see how the numbers shake out with just Aldi. Looking at the proposed project cost, it's primarily infrastructure costs. So you have storm sewer, water, sanitary sewer, some street reconstruction. So that would be phased into phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is really building out I guess what we would consider the critical infrastructure. And then phase 2, there are a couple of parcels that the platting could change on them. So we just decided to break out that portion of the infrastructure to a future phase and really focus on the primary street work that needs to be done to get this area developable in phase 1. There's some potential land purchase that could occur in phase 2, as well as developer incentives. Those are all kind of question marks as to whether they'll be needed, but by including in the project plan, the city has that flexibility. And then there's some ongoing cost here. So the city will likely borrow to put in that infrastructure, given that you won't really have money for a long time down the road if you just sit and let a fund balance accrue based on Aldi. And you'll be very far into the life of this tax increment district to the point that you have any meaningful dollars to put in infrastructure. So this likely is a type of district where you look at some type of upfront financing from the city to put in that infrastructure in an earlier year. So we built in some interest costs for that borrowing, the cost to actually issue that debt, and then same thing as TID 5, there's kind of a line item here for the ongoing administration of the district. Tiny numbers again, but again, left side is your projected revenues, right side is your projected expenses. So on the left side, we do have an extra revenue coming into this district. So the very far left, that's what we expect to collect in tax increment revenue from the Aldi. So over the 20-year term, around 820,000 or so of tax increment revenues. We're looking at $1 million for phase 1 infrastructure costs, So immediately off the bat, there is a mismatch there where your expenses are higher than the projected revenues. And so the solution here that we've modeled is you issue that upfront financing as some type of general obligation type pledge, which allows the city the ability to levy a property tax to make up any shortfall within the district. And so you can get creative with how you structure that financing, and you can delay principal till the later years, so that hopefully you get some additional development on top of the Aldi, so you have more revenues coming into this district to pay that debt service, so that it cash flows and you don't have a shortfall that you have to levy for. But what we are estimating here is that in those early years, starting in 2029, you just have the Aldi and you put in all this infrastructure, there will be some type of levy need to support this district to the tune of around 20,000 until you get to 2036, which 12 years down the road, hopefully there's more in the ground. But that shortfall would creep up to around 120,000 that would need to be levied for. That's at the point in time where you're really starting to ramp up your repayments of that debt service. The other costs built into here, it's just those capital project costs of $1 million. We modeled that out for next year. Not saying that's what's going to happen. It's just putting something on paper so that we understand kind of what we're talking about with this tax increment district. And then the only other cost within this one would be the admin costs. So all those phase 2 costs are really deferred to the point that they would be deemed necessary. So we didn't include them in the financial exhibit here. Looking at all that, we are showing that this district would need each year of tax increment revenue collections to really mitigate as much of the tax impact to any type of shortfall into this district. So looking at a closure out in 2045. That's all I had on TID number 7.
And I just want to follow up a couple things. Again, I mean, eyes wide open. To make this happen, this infrastructure happen, we talked about, you know, maybe doing everything at once, because obviously if you bring in a contractor once, it's cheaper than mobilizing a contractor again. But once we found out Harry's showed the financials of it that we were behind, we thought, okay, first of all, let's do a phasing approach and see if we can phase it in, so we can not throw everything in the ground, just throw what's necessary for the kind of phase 1, knowing that what we have for all these, and then hopefully as we move down the line, we have more developed in there, we need more infrastructure. So that's number one, why we wanted to look at that phasing aspect of it. And then number two, I mean, like Harry was saying, we don't have any developer agreements or anything set up right now. We are a little bit behind on the financials of this right now. So, you know, we might not have the ability to do developer incentives like we did with some of the other projects, because we have to pay for that infrastructure. So we'll have to kind of work on that as we go through this project. But like Harry talked about, he brought in some options of assumptions of bringing in more development and throwing those numbers in, but we said, hey, we don't know that. We just know all these right now. That's the only revenue we want coming in. We know it's coming in right now. What's the worst case scenario? And this is the worst case scenario, that it is upside down yet. So we're hoping that the point of putting this infrastructure in is to get more development in there to incentivize that, to have the infrastructure in. But again,
What's that Ascension thing? Is that something that has been talked about, or is that just something that they've mentioned and now we're working on it, or how?
Several years ago, and I don't know if you remember the year, was that 2004 years ago?
4 years.
Well, so about 4 years ago, Ascension did purchase that property. So
Oh, they have
own
it purchased. Okay.
I've had some talks with them a year or two ago. They don't have any plans as of that
Okay.
point in time. They just
But they own that land.
correct.
Okay.
So there's an assumption there's going to be something down the road, you know, with that. But again, there's very little ability for any of the development to come in, you know, around this, on the backside of this area, unless the infrastructure is there.
Right.
You know? And the other thing is with the Aldi development going here, there is a for sale sign for that 2.9 acres that's on the north side. right now, I mean, Dave and I have talked about this, we don't like the idea of sticking out another driveway on Shawano Street so close to the intersection. We would prefer that that driveway goes to the north on the extension of Partridge Drive, but we got to put that roadway in there to make that happen as well, so. But again, we wanted to make it eyes wide open. It's not financially solvent yet unless we get more development in that area. Want to make that crystal clear.
Okay,
Go back to slide 14, please. The water that's there on line 2, is that,
Mhm.
those numbers are considering there's already water installed in some of that?
Correct, so some of that was, I believe, I don't think there's any laterals out there as of yet, so we assume there wasn't laterals.
It's on the other road behind, right there.
Yep.
where the main is.
But there's a main there, but no laterals, to my understanding. So we would stub out laterals, so, because we don't want to put in the roadway and then all of a sudden people digging up the laterals. And then there was another, that includes an option to put water here, which I believe there's no water there now. Jay can confirm that there could be a loop, that it's looping the water system as well. So that's the water infrastructure.
And then during this time period until the developer buys that farmland will all be use value tax, then correct?
Use value tax. It'll be
Being
taxed.
used for farmland, so it's gonna be taxed as farmland.
Correct.
Okay.
The taxing values here do not change in or out of the TID district.
No, yeah, it's gonna be based on the
Until
use of the property.
Until a
So,
zoning changes
yep.
or whatever, right?
Until the development pretty much happens. You know,
Yeah.
That's when the value of the property changes and the taxes change.
so going back to being upside down at this moment, what's it going to take to be right side up?
How much value? Boy, Harry, I don't know if we have the
Two.
numbers.
Well, just doing some math, looking at the shortfall. So the Aldi, 2.25 million, spinning out 43,000. Probably need 3 more Aldi type developments and then you're solvent.
Okay.
So in the neighborhood of 8 million of total value.
Now, is that phase 1 and phase 2 or just phase 1?
That's just phase 1.
Just phase 1.
So phase 2 would need additional development to support those costs.
Any other questions with that? And the whole purpose of this is obviously, we don't see the ability to get more development in this area without that infrastructure. It can't happen. So we're encouraging more of that ability for that development to have around that area. You know, hopefully with the Aldis, people are going to want to kind of be drawn to more, the ability to bring more development there. So
Could that be what Ascension is waiting for?
I have no clue. I need to reach out to Ascension and maybe revisit, you know, because it's been a couple of years since I talked to them. And at that point in time, they didn't really have any plans, other than sometime in the future, they wanted to do something. What that something is, I'm not sure. If there's no other questions, then if Bernie wants to open up the public hearing for TID number 7.
Okay, I'd like to open up a public hearing regarding a proposed creation of tax district number 7. Again, I'd like to open up the hearing for the purpose of creation of tax increment district number 7. Okay, I'm gonna close the public hearing. Okay, moving on to number 6, consideration and possible action of a resolution approving the amendment to the project plan and boundaries of tax increment district number 5.
Here, do you want to kind of review what the resolution's all about real quick?
Yeah, so essentially what the resolution is saying is that the project plan is substantially complete with what's required under state statute. And that you're making a recommendation onto the common council, that they should take action on the district or consider action on the district. That's pretty much it. Just, it's basically saying the plan commission has reviewed the project plan and recommends the council to review it as well.
This one?
Yeah, on the corner of Wolford Avenue and Wyman there, where the two apartments are proposed. There's really not a lot of infrastructure that has to be changed or added or anything there, is there, other than that would be at the expense of the developer for the most part, correct? And we'd just be collecting the tax.
Correct.
It would-
We might have to tap in a little bit. I'm not sure what laterals are there, Jay. I don't know if you know what laterals are there, if any. Right off the top of your
Yeah,
head, but,
I mean, we have stuff there.
but the
The
mains
developer
are,
has to fix it, just like all these would have to pay for.
Yep.
the towers.
correct. So in Harry's point, the only other expenses to this would be to, because of this would be just if there's the developer's agreement with any incentives that are negotiated.
Yep.
Other than that, there's no really expenses for infrastructure.
Right.
We have proposed at this point in time, that's necessary.
And you have to get that rezoned to put the apartment on Spring Street.
Yeah, so there's several steps. This is one of the steps, because lot 54 on there, the southern lot, we are in process right now to, and you'll have the developer come here hopefully later and give a, talk about the letter, but they are proposing to ask us, and we'll talk about that later, about rezoning it. And then we also have to look at our comprehensive plan and make sure that they jive. So we're starting that process as well. So this is one of several processes to make that development happen.
And they'd also have to combine two lots.
Yep.
Okay, do I gotta have a motion on that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion on considering a possible action of resolution approval for District 5.
I would move that we make that action for a resolution approving an amendment to project and plan boundaries on tax number 5.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion's been made, seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next item is consider and possible action on the resolution establishing the boundaries of an approving the project plan for tax increment district number 7.
I'll make that motion to approve the resolution establishing the boundaries of and approving the project plan for tax increment district number 7.
I'll second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next item is review of a CSM to combine parcels at the corner of Cook and Fremont Street.
I received a building permit application for 2 buildings from Elker Trucking. Business is growing and they're looking for more storage space.
Mhm.
When reviewing this stuff, I noticed several of the buildings crossed parcels. And what happened was there was a development originally platted there that was later abandoned, and we're looking to combine those parcels to create one now. Help with the tax, how it's taxed and so on, and then allow him a little more freedom with the boundaries of that lot to grow. So
So here's what
We're-
Dave's talking about. You can see the buildings and all these lot lines. There's like, what, 26 lots?
Yeah, if you can take off the imagery, it shows up a little easier, I think.
No.
Maybe not, 'cause
Yep.
yeah, there you go.
And you can see the
So
buildings.
now all these are taxed different partially, so we're looking to combine them all, to treat them as one property.
So which lots are we looking at, 9 and 10, or are we looking at the whole
That whole
batch?
thumb area there,
Okay,
yep, the whole, that'll all be one.
okay.
So instead of getting 26 or 27 tax bills, they'll get one.
Good, okay.
And then he doesn't meet setback requirements because of all the different parcel lines there, so that'll allow him a lot more ability to move buildings in and around that as he grows. We're recommending approval from the zoning department to approve the CSM. Chad, do you want to mention real quick that we do have to tweak a couple, one city-owned property that
There is, and we're gonna work on this in conjunction, but this is you guys remember several years ago, Hilker requested to do a land swap in here because they wanted to extend their driveway. I don't know if you guys remember that. That was, I don't know, 3-ish years ago. So what happened was this lot right here, you can see the lot lines protruded out and came, this was all one lot here. And then our lot actually protruded into half of their driveway. So what the concept was to take a little bit here, take a little bit here, and create these two lots, and the lots are created correctly. However, when it was submitted to the county, and we just recently found this out, they named this lot for the city, it should have been named for Hilker, and they named this lot for Hilker, and this should be the city lot. So we need to go through a process to just get the naming correct on those two lots, flip them. And then in the end, this new CSM, you can kind of see includes taking the lot that should be theirs and including that into the overall new parcel. So we're gonna work on that as a separate project, just to clean up the names and make sure that they're labeled correctly, because our wastewater treatment plant lift station is actually named on their property right now, and that needs to be named in ours, so
So the city will maintain what?
this one.
So, okay.
And this one should be theirs.
Okay.
It's named ours right now. This one should be ours, and it's named in their name right now. So we just gotta correct that error.
And the reason that we need to keep that is because we have,
Yeah, there's a
Lift stations,
wastewater
okay.
treatment lift station.
Yep. that's it, okay.
So the zoning office is recommended approval, the CSM pending the error that was created there. We'll take care of that.
I'll make a motion to combine the parcels at the corner of Quick and Fremont Street.
Okay, motion was made and seconded to combine both parcels on Cook and Fremont Street. All in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
All opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, the next item on it is consider petition from the owner of vacant parcel 33-12-76-44. That's the northeast corner of Wyman Street and Spring Street to rezone the parcel from R2 to B1.
So he provided a letter to us, kind of explaining what his intent was. And this is the south lot. This is not the corner lot of Wolf and Wyman. It's Spring and Wyman, so it's the back south lot. And that was currently zoned R2. We're looking to change the zoning on that to B1, yeah, B1. That way, if we do end up doing a CSM there, we can treat that all as B1, because the corner lot currently is B1 on Wolf River.
Wasn't there a restriction on the height of the building on Spring Street?
Yes. And
Because he was going
the
4 on,
models that they give us, they're gonna meet that. It was
Yeah.
40 feet for that zoning district. And they changed their plans a little bit to get under that height restriction.
So like we talked about, this letter officially starts the process for us to consider rezoning. He has to petition the commission to rezone the parcel. So this is, per our ordinance, this is a required step that he has to do that. So this kicks off our process. If you guys, approve that consideration, you're not gonna approving the rezoning yet, but you're just gonna approve the consideration for staff to begin that process. There's a bunch of different things that we need to go through with that. We have to send out some notices and go through a public hearing, and we'll work on all that, providing that you guys like this, want to continue on this step based on his initial request.
I'm looking for a motion to consider a petition to vacate parcel on the northeast corner of Wyman and Spring Street, to rezone it to B1 from R2.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, now we got zoning code update by Vandy Wall.
All right, Ben, we're finally up to you. Again, I'll introduce Ben from Ben Wall Associates, and then Scott as well. But Ben, I'll let you kick it off. You can either share your screen, or I do have it ready on my side if you want to do that. So your call for your presentation.
Yeah, if you want to give me screen sharing, then I'll do that.
I suppose that would help, huh? All right, give it a try. Sorry.
No worries. All right. So, hello again. We're back from a couple months ago when we talked a little bit about the zoning ordinance evaluation memo. And what we've brought back before you is a variety of information. We're going to relatively hit the highlights of that information. I know that there's a lot there, but what we want to do is sort of set the framework for the rest of the code with this section. So what we'll be talking about today are draft new zoning districts, and then related to those zoning districts would be the bulk dimension standards and the land uses. We want to take this step to start with in terms of familiarizing you all with the core elements of the code itself. These are the big picture kind of tied to everything else, and we want to get these in a good spot to start with. So then when we're diving into the writing of the text and applying different iterations of the draft map together, we're in a good spot moving forward. So a little bit on the project overview, just to reorient you. I know it's been a couple of months. We were in the May meeting related to that memo. We're here today talking about the zoning districts and land use and bulk tables. What we'll do then is start drafting text in terms of part 1 and part 2, walking through different policy decisions related to those, and work through the fall and winter on those elements. And also work on the zoning map to follow that. And so this is a year-long process, but we're moving along in the right direction right now. What I mean by part 1 and part 2 of the ordinance is, so here's the draft structure of the code. And part 1 is highlighted in yellow, being the definitions, the zoning districts, land uses, dimensional standards, and non-conforming situations. Those 3 in the middle are really the core elements of the tables that you have before you. And so they really set the stage and are the majority part of part 1. They also influence how we put together part 2. So we need to work through those elements first, make sure we're in a good spot before we get too far ahead of ourselves and have to backtrack in some capacity. But that's generally sort of our series of events and next steps overall. So I wanted to walk through the new zoning districts that we've drafted. provide an example image of each one and sort of the thought process behind them. What we did is we created an all-new set of zoning districts. Some of them match existing districts, so we reflect the existing development patterns that are on the ground, but we made strategic tweaks and changes to different dimensional standards and land uses to reflect what the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, in addition to that issues and identifications memo that we reviewed a couple of months ago. Subsequently, there is a couple of new districts also proposed, and those are to reflect comprehensive goals again, but also address some state law changes as well. And these districts are intentionally going to be tested over time, and they're going to be tested on some draft versions of zoning maps. We're going to work through them together throughout this process, and I fully expect there to be refinement as we go. So what we have before you is not the end all be all by any stretch. It's a starting point that will continue to be refined as we move forward. And I just wanted to note that, as you know, I know you guys have had a long meeting already tonight. And so we want to get through this relatively quickly, but have an opportunity to discuss. But knowing that we're not making a decision tonight, we're moving in a incremental pace through this process. So we broke up the new zoning districts between a translation of the existing, the new, and the future land use categories, so you can see it all on one screen. What we also did is broke them up by residential, commercial, and industrial. And so we'll walk through each of that in a separate kind of section here. Right now, there's a wide variety of residential zoning districts from R1 all the way up to R6. They cover a variety of different types of formats. What we're proposing is to consolidate those districts into single-family residential, mixed use, or I should say mixed residential, low density, medium density, high density. So that would vary in scale and format, and then mobile home to reflect the existing mobile home zoning district. So single family areas, we know what these look like. We know where these are. We want to reflect where those are located today in that new zoning district. As we move up in scale and density, this will be our first district of mixed residential, which is the low. And this would be a single family and two family oriented zoning district, but it would also allow for two different types of two family. So on the image on the left is a duplex, a side-by-side format or configuration. On the right is a two flat, meaning above and below are two separate units. And so we want this district to enable both types of development patterns because we know we have both types within the community today. Then as we jump up a little bit in scale, size, and density, we're talking about the mixed residential medium. And this is what you would traditionally think of as maybe an 8, 10, 12 unit building, a little bit bigger than the single family and two family. And we're moving up the spectrum. But this district would also enable anything between 1 and 12 units. So that missing middle housing that we talked about, this district would really be tailored and customized to enable that type of development to take place. And then as we move farther up the spectrum of density, the residential high, in terms of mixed residential high, this is what we think of as our probably most dense residential apartment complex kind of looking situations. Some of the new development that you've got approved on the river, that kind of thing would be reflective of this zoning district. And then finally, mobile home would be reflective of what we have on the ground in the existing mobile home park today. Commercial and mixed use zoning districts right now, as you see on the left column there, the city has a B1, a B2, and a B3 district. These are oriented to downtown, the highway, commercial areas, and then smaller scale sort of neighborhood, corner shop, if you think of that kind of realm of development. That's the convenience B3. Now in the middle, we have the proposed new zoning districts, we're keeping these in sort of the same format in orienting the B1 to be the downtown mixed-use zoning district, B2 being the new corridor mixed use, and B3 being what we're calling the new neighborhood mixed use. There is one proposed new zoning district associated with this grouping, and that is institutional. And what we're proposing to use this district for is for schools, for churches, for municipal buildings, things that are traditionally right now zoned residential, but have a very different scale, format, function than the residential zoning district is really built to handle. And so we're proposing to build a zoning district directly to handle those types of situations. So downtown, obviously, we know that has a unique character, format, and it looks different than pretty much everywhere else in the community. We want to reflect that within this new zoning district and keep that as we move forward. Corridor mixed use, these are going to be your areas where you traditionally see various types of commercial development on the northern and southern end of the community. These are a few images of Shawnall Street where there's different variety of different formats, but generally this is where we would envision the corridor mixed use applying for the most part. Then when we get to the neighborhood mixed use, that's going to be more related to smaller type commercial that you can see is a lot different scale than the corridor mixed use that I just showed. They're usually smaller on smaller properties, closer together. They may look like that image down below where there might be a house that got turned into a commercial and a residential mixed use building. And so that's what this neighborhood mixed use example is really enabling or reflective of that type of development. And then finally, institutional, this is going to be related to the schools and those other types of uses I just talked about. As you can see, this is currently zoned a residential zoning district. Does that even look close to that single family or two family neighborhoods that I just showed you? No, not really, but they have the same rules right now. And what we want to do is create standards that are reflective of how these types of development are significantly different than maybe that zoning district that they have today. Industrial zoning districts right now, we have 3 in the city. Manufacturing as the M, and then you have an MPO, and then a manufacturing park MP. What we're proposing is 3 different districts, one being the light industrial, which would combine the M and the MPO, a medium, which would be more closely related to the MP or the manufacturing park, and then a new heavy industrial zoning district. And we'll talk through the differences and what we mean by these definitions here. So when we're talking about light industrial, this is truly more reflective of activities that are occurring mostly indoors. So the majority of the operation, the business is occurring, whether they're constructing something, logistics, whatever it may be, it's occurring within the building for the most part. Obviously, there's going to be outdoor parking. There's going to be some traffic, deliveries and movements like that. But for the most part, what you see is an indoor oriented type industrial. And that's what we mean by light in this sense. And then as we move up the spectrum, medium industrial, we're seeing more outdoor activity occurring related to these individual operations. So there's still stuff happening inside, but as you can see, there's significantly more occurring outdoors than there would be in the light industrial areas. And so we can handle those in a little bit different way. And then finally, heavy industrial. And I know this is an image of Tyson, which isn't in the city, but it's just to give you a perspective of sort of the scale of what we're talking about with heavy industrial. So I don't know if there's an example actually of heavy industrial in the community. Once we dig into it a little bit further, we'll see. But what we're trying to account for is these uses that are going to have significant impacts to the surrounding community. And we want to have sort of that control piece through the zoning code, in particular with the new zoning district, to enable the city to have that kind of control, whether it be the large scale of it or just the impact of the amount of activity happening on this site in relationship to neighboring properties, and trying to balance that approach when considering these opportunities in the future. Now there's an ag and a natural resources district. These are sort of distinctly different than any of the development sort of oriented districts. What we're proposing here is to retain the ag district, just translate the natural resources to conservancy, and then add a new zoning district for parks and recreation. And in particular, what we're aiming for in creating a zoning district specifically for parks and recreation is one, that it's distinctly different from conservancy areas, where conservancy areas are something, or natural resources we want to protect. We don't want to see a lot of development activity occurring on those properties. For the most part, we want those to retain in a natural open space setting. Whereas parks and recreation are much more flexible in that we want the opportunity to have open space and potentially some natural areas, but there's a lot more activity going on, whether it's, you know, pavements related to parking or a skate park or example, you know, playgrounds, athletic fields. They're sort of a unique characteristic and component of the community. And so we felt, at least starting with looking and exploring the opportunity for a new zoning district in that space. Agricultural, this is, you know, basically going to handle properties that are within the community, but are mainly retained in an ag use for the time being. Maybe they will develop in the future and get a rezoning, but for right now, they're going to stay in an ag use primarily. Conservancy, again, these areas are going to be mainly your floodplains, your wetlands, your, you know, steep slopes and wooded areas, all of that type of thing that you want to keep sort of protected long term. And then parks and recreation, like I just talked about, when you traditionally think of like a neighborhood park and the different activities that go on in that space, how that's distinctly different from maybe a conservancy area or a residential area in the types of uses that are occurring on that property. The final two zoning districts are directly related to that Act 67 I talked about, that the state took a little bit of our power away from controlling the conditional use permit process. And what we're recommending to do is create two different zoning districts that I fully intend that we will not put on the zoning map, but they will build the standards that you will have as the city to be able to control these options in the future. And so instead of using a conditional use permit in a different zoning district to handle something like an intensive outdoor activity or an adult-oriented entertainment business, what we're instead going to do is create zoning districts specifically for those types of uses and those types of developments. And then the city will have more control in that space if something were to be proposed. Whereas today, there might be a little bit more ambiguity in that space and not as clear-cut standards. And so we want to make those very clearly defined, take them out of conditional use and make them zoning districts. So the rezoning process, you have more control. Adult-oriented entertainment business, what we mean by this, the most obvious example is like a strip club. This is not within the city, but just showing it as an example of what we mean by what would be in that type of zoning district. And then intensive outdoor activity. There are no quarries within the city right now. This is just an example. This district could also be related to like a salvage yard or some other very intense outdoor activity that's going to have a lot of impact on the surrounding neighborhood and the surrounding its surroundings in general. And we want to be able to have control and handle that in a way that is sort of the most legally defensible method we have right now. So with that, I will stop. Were there any questions in relationship to the zoning districts? Any of these sort of things that I've covered? I know I did go relatively quickly, but I want to be, you know, conscious of your time here this evening as well.
So you had mentioned when you were talking about the adult activity,
Yes.
provisional licensing. So, and I'm not asking the question specifically regarding adult entertainment. I'm asking it in general for any of these zonings. By putting together zonings in this manner, is that going to give the city more control over whether or not they can, they have to approve provisional licensing?
Well, generally speaking, if the use is not permitted within the zoning district, then a license would be null and void. There'd be no opportunity to seek a license. So with that being said, if the use is permitted in that zoning district, then the license procedure would be the secondary step. And what I mean by creating more zoning districts to handle these specific situations is that you would have the control through the rezoning process before you would ever get to a licensure for that example.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll stress on that a little bit more. He talked about that, remember the conditional grant use, hands are tied. You have to, really go through the process to, justify why it's not allowed.
Correct.
You basically have, whereas zoning, you have a lot more leeway, correct, Ben? That you have a lot more control. You don't have the same obligation in the state statutes to just rezone a property compared to giving a conditional grant.
Right. With a rezoning, there's a findings of facts that the plan commission needs to make to approve a zoning district or zoning map amendment. And those findings of facts provide sort of avenues or opportunities for you to analyze it a lot more in a kind of scrutiny type of format than what you just mentioned, Chad, where we have to sort of prove that they're not meeting the requirements to deny the conditional use.
Are we attempting to limit the amount of those conditional uses that or conditional grants? I think our goal is to lessen the amount of those that would come before us.
Yeah, Ben, why don't you touch on that? Because when we started this process, we talked about, really cleaning this up so we don't have, a lot more of those conditional grant opportunities, correct?
Yeah, and if you have the land use tables in front of you, you can see that there's still Cs on that table, and that's because there's still going to be some situations where we think a conditional use might make sense. But for the most part, you can see there's a significant amount of Ps, and that's related to permitted by right, meaning that use is allowed in that zoning district. That means maybe shifting these zoning districts around a little bit, like I talked about, to handle certain situations differently than we do today. But it's trying to reduce the number of Cs in total on those tables to be able to handle things in a different format and a different way than we do today. And that's both enabling the things that are reflective of the community's goals, but on the other side, giving the city control in spaces where there may not be as much clear-cut procedural steps today as there need to be.
And on those maps, Ben, can you just reiterate the different colors between the red and the black?
Yeah. So did get a couple of slides ahead of me. What I wanted to show is basically an orientation to those tables. Everything in red is what we're proposing as part of the new zoning code. Everything in black in parentheses is what you have today in your existing zoning code in relationship to that zoning district. So if we look at the SR or the existing R1 zoning district, which we're renaming to single family residential, you can see what's permitted today is a detached residential accessory structure. We're proposing to permit that continuation in that zoning district moving forward. Where there's a new P, like next to electric vehicle charging, for example, that is something we're proposing as a permitted new land use in that zoning district. And this table is related to accessory structures, so it's not principal, land uses. I should have, mentioned that to begin with. But generally speaking, what you're looking at it in a holistic format is that we've tried to basically show everything you have in your existing code in relationship to everything we're proposing, which is a lot, but it's the only way that we can find to most effectively compare and contrast and make decisions related to sort of how we want to move forward and address certain situations. With that, I will also just say that the bulk dimensional tables or the bulk dimension standards, this is your setbacks, your lot area, widths, all of those different types of things. It's the same sort of orientation where everything in black is existing, everything in red is proposed, new. And so for that R1 example, for instance, what you have right now is 7,200 feet. 7,200 square feet is the minimum lot size for that R1 zoning district. What we're proposing is lowering that to 5,000 square feet. When we make changes to the minimum lot area, that then impacts subsequently setbacks because they're driven by one another in terms of if you have a certain lot size, certain setbacks are dictated upon that to be reflective of sort of what we see out in the community today and what we would see in new development too. And so when we're looking at those different lot sizes and areas, sort of those influence some of the other metrics that you see further down those columns. But generally speaking, we want to provide you with the opportunity to snapshot, basically, here's what we have, here's what we could do, let's make some tweaks and changes from there.
And there's a couple areas where you have 2 red numbers. Can you identify what you mean by the minimum lot width? You have 2 red numbers there. What does that mean?
Correct. So what we are attempting to address with those provisions where you see an or in particular for the lot width is when you have 2 units that are on separate parcels, but they have a shared wall. So the most typical example of this is a duplex where there's 2 separate parcels and you have the lot basically running down the middle of the building, but those are separately owned pieces of property and structures. And so what we're trying to do is say, you don't need to meet the same exact requirements because you're basically going to be able to do that with those 2 parcels next to each other rather than one standalone parcel in a different situation. And so what that is intending to say is in a shared lot line situation, the minimum lot width would be 25. In a single single unit on a single property situation, it would be 50. So we're essentially getting the same thing, but we're not creating an undue burden by saying this duplex, because it's on 2 separate lots, needs to be twice as wide as if it were just on 1 lot.
What would you say are some of the biggest changes that you are proposing?
So we've got some items to talk about here this evening. One being density. The other is sort of how to handle personal storage. Some of those other land uses like indoor institutional, garage setbacks, and standalone residential. What I would say we're trying to accomplish is a lot of what we talked about in the last meeting related to those memos and taking an approach to advance those goals, resolve existing issues, but also progress towards, some of those things we're trying to achieve within the comprehensive plan and things like that. So for example, I guess I'll just talk about in terms of the bulk dimensional standards, you'll see that we lowered standards in terms of minimums in a lot of different spaces. Maybe not dramatically, but we are proposing to lower several of those standards in several different zoning districts. And what this is really aiming to do is there's a lot of properties, honestly, when we looked at it, that, well, I'll just show you. We ran a map analysis to say, basically, with your existing, well, no, I need to stop my screen. Sorry about that. So I know it's probably difficult to see on your screen, but what we're really trying to show is in this teal green color, these are the properties that are greater than 7,200 square feet. These are the properties that are under 7,200 square feet, which is your minimum lot size right now in the R1 zoning district. So when you look at the bulk dimension standards, we're proposing to lower that because approximately, a quarter maybe of these properties that are currently zoned R1 aren't even meeting that minimum lot size, which means that they don't have a lot of flexibility to utilize more of their lot in a variety of different ways. We also know that development patterns have changed in respect to smaller, more dense, whether it's single family, two family, multifamily, and that's to reduce land costs and construction costs and hopefully bring down the cost of housing to make it affordable or attainable. And so on the flip side, that works for us in a positive element in relationship to new development too. If you look at the purple areas, for example, those are your R2 areas. And so that likewise has a 7,200 square foot minimum lot size. Those dark purple are those properties that are under that 7,200, and the lighter purple are the ones that are over, and that's closer to like a 50-50. Again, we're trying to reduce those standards to not only reflect what's on the ground, but also to reflect the opportunities for new development in patterns that we would like to see. So those are some like big picture, I would say, changes in respect to why you're probably looking at it being like, well, why don't these match up? Why are you proposing this or this? And it's generally along this big picture sort of framework and thinking.
And along those same lines too, as I mentioned in the past, one of the reasons for this project was to help us unlock some of that new state funding that's available. But we need to show in some capacity how the city is helping to reduce the cost of construction and housing. So one of the things that we can do is we can go back now and say, hey, we reduced in our zoning plan, reduce the minimum lot size for that, which helps reduce housing costs. So that's one big checkbox we can show, hey, state, we did something to help this project, help that process, to help unlock hopefully some of that state funding for developers.
So Chad, I guess at the time we have right now, some of these policy discussions, I think, warrant, a considerable amount of time. And I don't know if today's meeting makes the most sense to, spend another potentially hour talking about this, or is it a better opportunity to utilize either next month's meeting or a different meeting to do that? And I'll defer to the commission and to Chad on that.
Why don't you can you bring up that, your talking points for the kind of hot topic things that we need to address, just so we can kind of see that in the screen again. And I'll kind of leave it up to the commission. Do you want to maybe hit one or two of these, or just want to absorb what you heard right now and then revisit some of these later on? I'll kind of leave it up to you guys.
So Chad and I had a chance to look over all this information over the past few weeks. We kind of met with Ben and went through a lot of what we thought you guys were doing, and these were some of the topics here that we probably wanted a little more input from the planning commission without us trying to make decisions based on what you guys were looking for. So that's how we come up with this list right here.
Chad, I had a question on this translate table yet.
Sure, Ben. Jeff has a question on your, the district translation table.
Ben, when you were going through this table, you said convenience and commercial, the B3.
Yeah.
Be where nonprofits would be located. Why would you want those located in those areas? Because traditionally, churches have been located in residential places around New London, and now in the last 10 years, we've probably lost $40,000 in tax revenue of churches buying up buildings in the business district and coming off the tax roll. I would not be in favor of that at all.
No, so what we're proposing is a new zoning district called institutional to specifically handle churches or nonprofits in that way. The B3 zoning district would be translated to neighborhood mixed use, which would allow most of your commercial oriented types of development, in addition to having the opportunity to be a mix of commercial or residential in the same structure.
No, Ben, this was one of those kind of tricky things you gotta keep your head around because we have a land use of indoor institutional or institutional, but we also have a district of institutional proposed, correct?
Yes.
So if the commission want, I got labeled that land use tables, page 2, one of the bigger sheets I gave you. It shows, to what Jeff was talking about, some of those institutional uses. Well, Ben, can you comment a little bit, and maybe, put me out there a little bit. What considerations do we need to have with, like, faith-based organizations in different areas in our community? Obviously, there's, I don't want to say protections, but if there's some things regarding that, and maybe we're jumping ahead into some of these institutional land uses here.
So there is a federal law called what I call RLUPA, Federal Religious Land and Institutionalized Persons Act, which restricts how the city can regulate these types of uses. So what we need to do is to basically what we're proposing is that you guys as the plan commission give us direction as to what you would like to try and regulate these uses and how you'd like to orient them. And so what I mean by that is, are these uses allowed in the commercial areas like they are today? Are they only allowed in one single district like institutional? Or are they allowed in a variety of different districts like commercial and industrial and institutional? And from that perspective, we'll work with the city attorney, we'll do our own research and figure out, what can we do within the parameters of these laws that we have, knowing sort of what your direction and intention is. And maybe we can't ultimately accomplish exactly what this commission would like to do, but we would like some direction on what you would like and how you would like us to handle that.
Those will be one of those things that will bring Stegbauer and kind of get more information, what he feels legally we can or cannot do that aspect. But this was one topic that we definitely wanted to talk about, in this process.
Can you go back to the discussion topics? And just give us a real quick, 1 or 2 sentence. Definition of what that would, what exactly, so that we can think about it at least.
That's a good idea. Maybe just a brief what that is, and then we can chew on it a little bit and bring it back to more detailed discussion later. I like that.
Yeah, so I did notice there is one missing on here, but I'll hit that in this list too. So first, density approach. We're specifically talking in relationship to residential densities, and what we've come up with is an approach that we're regulating sort of in different types of ways. Whereas today, you're strictly regulating based off of the number of units in a building. And so what we've come up with is continuing that approach for some of the zoning districts, but in other zoning districts, using a form-based approach, meaning that you're regulating by size of the lot, the setbacks, the height, all of those requirements that are built into that table. For personal storage facilities, This is a conversation that I've had in many communities, and you guys are not unique in that they are very popular because they're very cheap to put up. They produce almost no tax base, but they're permitted in a lot of commercial areas where a much more valuable use could go. And we want to have the conversation, should they continue to be permitted in commercial districts or only in industrial districts or only a select single zoning district, so you could have more control in that space.
That's the.
We are, oh, sorry, Chad.
Nope, go ahead.
The other indoor institutional, we sort of hit the highlights of that one already. Basically, where do we want to orient those sort of nonprofit public entity kind of uses? Garage setbacks, we're talking about attached front-loaded garages and whether they extend further out in front of the structure, even with the structure or behind the structure. And what we typically see is like a snout house, what we call it in the planning world, where the entire facade is just dominated by a garage. And there's different design aspects of how those could be developed in the future, where we could have a setback for the garage so that you don't get that super dominated facade. Standalone residential, we wanted to talk through if we were going to permit in the commercial zoning districts standalone residential as a land use, or if we were only going to permit mixed use and standalone commercial. So meaning that right now downtown is really oriented to a mix of downtown or a mix of residential and commercial. Most of the other commercial areas are really oriented to strictly commercial. But are there residential opportunities we want to influence in those areas, or do we want to retain some of those areas specifically for commercial? And then finally, the other one that's not on this list that I missed, but I have a slide for, is height requirements. We adjusted some of the height requirements in increasing some of them and retaining some of the other ones. And we wanted to have a conversation about, are you comfortable increasing the height for some of these zoning districts? Or do we want to consider lowering them, or where do we want to go in that space? So that's sort of a high level summary of the big picture bullet points that, as Dave mentioned, we met with him and Chad and we talked through all of this and we said, what do we think the commission is most concerned about? What do they want to weigh in on? That's sort of the list we have generated here.
So I think that was a good plan. I mean, you got a lot of stuff in front of you. Now you have a little bit better idea what those numbers, what the red, what black, and all those different things are on those tables. Probably not a bad idea just to absorb that a little bit more. This starts the building blocks like Ben talked about, or this whole process. And I think maybe if Ben, do you think you come back next month and then we'll talk about those hot topic things a little bit more and continue our conversation with that?
Yeah, I think just we'll play it by ear in terms of the agenda, I guess. If you guys have a lot on your agenda, maybe it warrants a standalone meeting. I don't know, but I know that when you guys are used to like a 45-minute meeting and we're going into several hours and trying to retain this sort of hypothetical zoning conversation, it's a lot of information to digest. And so if we do need a standalone meeting, we're perfectly able and willing to do that as well.
Perfect. Any questions?
I do have one question. Maybe I missed it. The C, what does the C stand for?
That's the conditional grant.
Conditional grant. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
So the only thing I have that I know of right now for our next agenda is the tuning, the process for the Wyman Wolf project.
The zoning
And
aspect.
I think I had one other, seemed like I had another small CS something to look at. So as of right now, the agenda for next month is fairly light. So if people had time to look at over some of those bullet points we talked about, we could maybe put 1, 2, or 3 on the agenda for next go round.
Let's play it. We can kind of see what comes up in the next couple of weeks for the agenda, and then we'll just be in touch about if it's, like you said, if it's positive to just do the next meeting or do a standalone one. I think that's a good idea.
Sounds good. thank you all. It was good to see you, and thanks for the good conversation. And we'll again just start these conversations. There's more to come. So thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Scott.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next, meeting date is tentatively August 22nd. That work for everybody? Okay, now I'm looking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.